Study Session 2. The Nervous System. Introduction. The nervous system is the master control segment of living beings. It is responsible for the coordination of activities within the body. The nervous system comprises of two other subsystems, central nervous system and peripheral nervous system, PNS. In this study session, we will first look at the components, functions, and subdivisions of the central nervous system. Thereafter, we shall examine the PNS. Finally, we shall point out how automatic actions take place within the nervous system. Learning outcomes. At the end of this study session, you should be able to 1. Analyze the structural areas of the brain and the spinal cords with their specific functions. 2. Highlight the functions of specific areas of the PNS. 3. Point out how nerves regulate the activities of internal organs. The central nervous system. The central nervous system is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. Both the brain and the spinal cord are surrounded by three membranes called meninges. The membranes lie between the skull and the brain, and between the vertebrae and the spinal cord. Named from outside inwards, they are dura, arachnoid, and pia mater. The dura and arachnoid are separated by potential space called the subdural space. The arachnoid and pia are separated by the subarachnoid space containing cerebral spinal fluid. The brain. The brain lies within the cranial cavity, the head, and has four irregular shaped cavities or ventricles containing cerebral spinal fluid in brackets CSF. The parts of the brain are cerebrum, the brain stem in brackets composed of the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata, and the cerebellum. It constitutes about 1/50 of the body weight and received about 15% of blood pumped by the heart, approximately 750 ml per minute. The cerebrum. This is the largest part of the brain. It occupies the anterior and middle portions of the brain. Functions of the cerebrum include mental activities involved in memory, intelligence, sense of responsibility, thinking, reasoning, moral sense, and learning attributed to higher centers. 2. Sensory perception, including the perception of pain, temperature, touch, sight, hearing, taste, and smell. 3. Initiation and control of skeletal in bracket voluntary muscle contraction. There are three distinguishable areas of the cerebrum, which are precentral area, premotor area, and the frontal area. 1. The cells in precentral area initiate the contraction of skeletal muscles in brackets motor movement. Its nerve fiber passes downwards through the internal capsule to the medulla oblongata, where it crosses to the opposite side, then descends in the spinal cord. At the appropriate level in the spinal cord, the nerve impulse crosses a synapse to stimulate a second neuron, which terminates at the motor end plate of the muscle fiber. 2. The premotor area lies in the frontal lobe, immediately anterior to the motor area. The cells assist in achieving orderly series of movements that requires manual dexterity, e.g., tying a shoelace. The Broca's area has nerve cells, which controls movements necessary for speech. 3. The frontal area is responsible for communication between these and other regions in the cerebrum. They are responsible for the behavior, character, and emotional states of an individual. Sensory areas of the cerebrum. The auditory area. It lies below the lateral sulcus in the temporal lobe. The cells here receive and interpret impulses transmitted from the inner ear by the cochlear part of the vestibulocochlear nerves. The sensory speech area. It is located in the lower part of the parietal lobe, extending into the temporal lobe. Spoken word is perceived here. The olfactory area. This lies within the temporal lobe, where impulses from the nose via the olfactory nerves are received and interpreted. The taste area. This lies just above the lateral sulcus in the deep layers of the sensory area. Impulses from the special nerve endings in taste buds in the tongue and the lining of the cheeks, palate, and pharynx are perceived and interpreted as taste. The visual area. It lies below the parieto-occipital sulcus and includes the greater part of the occipital lobe. The optic nerve from the eyes passes to this area, which receives and interprets impulses as visual impressions. Relay stations. The cerebrum has other masses of gray matter, which act as relay stations, through which impulses are passed from one neuron to the other. The relay stations include 1. The basal nuclei. This is found deep within the cerebral hemisphere, with connections to the cerebral cortex and thalamus. They constitute part of the extrapyramidal tracts and are thought to be responsible for initiating muscle tone and slow and coordinated activities. Its deficiency could lead to jerky, clumsy, and uncoordinated movements. 2. Thalamus. It lies below the corpus callosum, one on each side of the third ventricle. It receives sensory input from the skin, visceral, and special sense organs before redirecting them to the cerebrum. 3. Hypothalamus. It is situated below and in front of the thalamus, immediately above the pituitary gland. Being linked to the posterior pituitary gland, the hypothalamus controls the output of hormones from both sides of the gland. This structure is also responsible for the control of autonomic nervous system, appetite and satiety, thirst and water balance, body temperature, emotional reactions, e.g., pleasure, fear, and rage. It is also concerned with sexual behavior, including child rearing, biological clocks, e.g., sleeping and waking cycles, body temperature, or including circadian rhythm. The brainstem. The brainstem comprises of the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. The functions of these areas are highlighted as follows. The midbrain. It has nerve fibers which connect the cerebrum with lower parts of the brain with the spinal cord. Its cell bodies act as relay stations for ascending and descending nerve fibers. Pons. It lies in front of the cerebellum, below the midbrain, and above the medulla. Some of its group of cells act as relay stations, and some of these are associated with the cranial nerves. medulla oblongata. It extends from the pons above and is continuous with the spinal cord below. The outer aspect is composed of white matter, which passes between the brain and the spinal cord. Its cells act as relay stations for sensory nerves passing from the spinal cord to the cerebrum. It is responsible for decussation of pyramids, sensory decussation, cardiovascular control, control of respiration, control of blood vessels, and reflexes such as vomiting, coughing, and sneezing. Cerebellum. The cerebellum is situated behind the pons and immediately below the posterior portion of the cerebrum, occupying the posterior cranial fossa. It is ovoid in shape and has two hemispheres. Gray matter forms the surface of the cerebellum, and white matter lies deeply. The cerebellum is responsible for coordinating voluntary muscle movement, posture, and balance. Cerebellar activities are not under voluntary control. It controls and coordinates balance and equilibrium in the body. The sensory input for these functions is derived from the muscle and joints, the eyes and the ears. Damage to the cerebellum usually results in clumsy, uncoordinated muscular movements, staggering gait, and inability to carry out smooth, steady, and precise movements. The spinal cord. The spinal cord is the elongated, almost cylindrical part of the central nervous system, which is suspended by the meninges and cerebrospinal fluid. It is continuous from above with the medulla oblongata and extends from the upper border of the antlers to the lower border of the first lumbar vertebra. The spinal cord has 31 segments and therefore 31 sensory and motor nerves. From above, there are 8 cervical nerves, 12 thoracic nerves, 5 lumbar nerves, 5 sacral nerves, and 1 coccygeal nerve. A sensory spinal nerve, which innervates a specific skin area, is called a dermatome. The thickness of an area of the spinal cord depends on the density of muscles and receptors in the dermatome attached to it. The spinal cord is the nervous tissue linked between the brain and the rest of the body. Nerves conveys impulses from the brain to the various organs and tissues, descending through the spinal cord. At the appropriate level, they leave the cord and pass to the structure they supply. Similarly, sensory nerves from organs and tissues enter and pass upwards in the spinal cord to the brain. The peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system, PNS in brackets, refers to all of the nervous tissue outside the brain and spinal cord. It includes the cranial nerves apart from the optic nerves, the spinal nerves, and the autonomic nervous system. It encompasses those neurons that connect the central nervous system, CNS in brackets, to the receptors, muscles, and organs at the periphery of the body. Most of the nerves of the PNS are made up of sensory nerve fibers, conveying afferent impulses from sensory end organs to the brain, and motor nerve fibers conveying efferent impulses from the brain through the spinal cord to effector organs. Each nerve has many nerve fibers compacted into a bundle. The PNS consists of 31 pairs of spinal nerves, 12 pairs of cranial nerves, and the autonomic part of the nervous system, the spinal nerves. They are named according to the vertebrae with which they are associated. The spinal nerves arise from both sides of the spinal cord and emerge through the intervertebrate foramina. Each nerve is formed by the union of a motor and sensory nerve roots and is therefore a mixed nerve. The cranial nerves. There are 12 pairs of cranial nerves originating from nuclei in the inferior surface of the brain. They exist in varieties such as sensory, motor, and mixed nerves. They are discussed in sequential order as follows. Olfactory nerves. They originate from the upper part of the mucous lining of the nasal cavity. They are sensory nerves responsible for the sense of smell. Optic nerves. The fibers originate in the retina of the eyes and they combine to form optic nerves. The nerves which are sensory are responsible for sight. Oculomotor nerves. The nerves arise from nerve cells near the cerebral aqueduct. Its sensory component controls sensation to move four extraocular muscles which move the eyeball. They also move the cerebral, intraocular in brackets, muscles to alter the shape of the lens, thereby changing the refractory power. They also move the circular muscles of the iris to contract the pupil. They also move the levatopalpebrae muscle, which raises the upper eyelid. Trochlear nerves. They arise from the nerve cells near the cerebral aqueduct to supply the superior oblique muscles of the eye. Trigeminal nerves. They are the largest and contain both motor and sensory nerves, hence called mixed nerves. The ophthalmic and mandibular nerve branches of the trigeminal nerves are sensory. The ophthalmic component is responsible for stimulation of the lacrimal glands, conjunctiva, forehead, eyelids, anterior scalp, and nasal mucosa. Trigeminal nerves have ophthalmic, maxillary, and mandibular branches. The maxillary component is sensory and supplies the cheeks, gums, upper teeth, and lower eyelids. The maxillary component is both sensory and motor. They supply the teeth, gums, lower jaw, pinea, lower lip, and tongue. With these, the nerves control chewing and mastication. Abducent nerves. It is a group of motor nerves centrally connected to the fourth ventricle of the brain. They are responsible for moving the lateral rectus muscle of the eye to move the eyes. Facial nerves. It has mixed nerves arising from the lower parts of the pons. The motor component controls the muscles of facial expression. The sensory fibers transmit impulses from the taste bud in the anterior two-thirds of the tongue to the taste perception area in the cerebral cortex. Vestibulocochlear nerves. These are sensory nerves, otherwise called auditory nerves. The vestibular portion arises from the semicircular canals and conveys impulses to the cerebellum. They are responsible for maintaining posture and balance. The cochlear nerve originates in the organ of Corti in the inner ear and conveys impulses to the hearing areas in the cerebral cortex, which sound is perceived. Glossopharyngeal nerves. These are mixed nerves arising from medulla oblongata. The motor fiber controls of the muscle of the tongue, pharynx, and secretory cells of the salivary gland, that is, parotid. The sensory fibers transmit nerve impulses to the cerebral cortex from the posterior third of the tongue, the tonsils, pharynx, taste bud in the tongue, and pharynx. They are responsible for swallowing, salivation, and dilation of blood vessels. Vagus nerve. They are mixed nerves with the larger distribution of areas of innervation. They originate from the medulla oblongata and other nuclei and pass downwards into the thorax and abdomen to form an important part of the parasympathetic nervous system. Its motor fibers supply the gastrointestinal tract, heart, kidneys, arteries, and blood vessels in the thoracic and abdominal cavities. The sensory fibers convey impulses from these areas to the brain. Accessory nerves. These motor nerve fibers arise from medulla and the spinal cord to supply the sternocleidomastoid and trapezius muscles. They are responsible for movement of the head, shoulders, pharynx, and larynx. Hypoglossal nerves. They are motor nerves arising from the medulla oblongata. They supply muscles of the tongue and hyoid bone to contribute to swallowing and speech. Autonomic part of the nervous system. This is a set of nerves responsible for self-regulation of the activities of internal organs. It is automatic and involuntary, that is, not under the control of will. Such activities are initiated below the level of the cerebrum, even though the stimulation may not be known by the individual, yet the effects may be perceived, e.g., the urge to void urine. It serves to respond to urgent changes in the body and the need to maintain hemostasis, that is, balance in the body. The organs through which autonomic effects are carried out include areas with smooth muscles, cardiac muscles, and glands. In these organs, autonomic changes include changes in the rate and force of the heartbeat, stimulation or depression of secretion of glands, vasoconstriction or vasodilatation, bronchoconstriction or bronchodilation, and changes in the size of the pupils of the eyes. The autonomic nervous system is associated with the nervous system that lies outside it. It is divided into two divisions, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic nervous system consists of two paired chains of ganglia, in brackets, collection of nerve cells, lying just to the left and right of the spinal cord in its central regions, in brackets, the thorax and the lumbar areas, and connected by axons to those spinal cord regions. Axons also extend from the sympathetic ganglia to the internal organs of the body. The sympathetic nervous system prepares the body for fight or flight activities. It increases the heart rate and breathing rate, and it decreases digestive activity. Because all the sympathetic ganglia are closely linked, they tend to act as a single system. That is, they act in sympathy with one another. The term para means next to. This is why the parasympathetic system lies adjacent to the sympathetic system. The parasympathetic system relates closely with the cranial nerves of the medulla and to the sacral nerves in the lower spinal cord. The parasympathetic ganglia are not arranged in a chain near the spinal cord. Instead, long axons extend from the spinal cord to parasympathetic ganglia in the organs themselves. Because the parasympathetic ganglia are not linked to one another, they sometimes act more independently than the sympathetic ganglia do. Activity of the parasympathetic system decreases heart rate, increases digestive rate, and in general, promotes energy-conserving non-emergency functions. The sweat glands, the adrenal glands, the muscles that constrict the blood vessels, and the muscles that erect the hairs of the skin have sympathetic input only. Other organs are controlled by both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems, but in opposite ways. In other words, while the sympathetic excites, the parasympathetic inhibits, and vice versa. Most of the final synapses of the sympathetic nervous system use neuropilin, although a few, such as the ones that control the sweat glands, use acetylcholine because the two systems use different synaptic transmitters. Certain drugs may incite or inhibit one system or another. For example, over-the-counter cold remedies exert their effects largely by blocking parasympathetic activity or by increasing sympathetic activity. This action is useful because the flow of sinus fluid is a sympathetic response. Thus, drugs that block the parasympathetic system inhibit sinus flow. The common side effects of cold remedies also stem from their ability to excite sympathetic responses and block parasympathetic ones. They inhibit salivation, inhibit digestion, and increase heart rate. They also have two effects on sexual responses because sexual arousal depends on the parasympathetic system. If one does not manage to get aroused, the drugs may speed up orgasm. This is why nervousness interferes with sexual arousal, while soft music and relaxation promotes it. Study session summary. In this study session, we discussed the coordination of activities within the body. We noted that the nervous system consisted of central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. The brain is made up of the cerebrum, the brainstem, in brackets, composed of the midbrain, pons and medulla oblongata, and the cerebellum. The spinal cord is a thick band of spinal tissue that runs through the spinal canal and to which 31 pairs of nerves are attached. The spinal cord conveys impulses from the brain and also conveys these to the various organs and tissues. We also discussed that the PNS encompasses those neurons that connect the CNS to the receptors, muscles, and organs at the periphery of the body. It consists of 31 pairs of spinal nerves, 12 pairs of cranial nerves, and the autonomic part of the nervous system. End of study session 2. Thank you for listening.